There is one detail in this case that sounds almost too small to matter. Not a weapon. Not a fingerprint. Not a confession written on paper. Just an empty can of sugar-free Red Bull, thrown into the grass by a woman who was trying very hard to look calm. And that is the strange part. Because when she threw it, she was not littering. She was not nervous in some ordinary way. She was standing on a wide piece of land, somewhere on a Scottish estate, beside the man she had planned to marry. A man who had recently told her something no fiancé is supposed to say. He told her he had killed someone. Not in the abstract. Not as a drunken joke. Not as some dark secret from a distant past that could never be checked. He gave her enough details that she could go home, search online, and realize the man he was talking about was real. A missing man. A retired serviceman. A charity cyclist. A father. A person whose family had spent 3 years wondering where he had gone. And now this woman, Caroline, was back beside the man who had confessed to her. She was trying to get one thing the police still did not have. A location. Not a rough memory. Not somewhere near the shooting ground. Not somewhere on the estate. A real place. A point in the earth. Because without the body, the case was still smoke. Without the body, the secret could stay buried. So she asked him, "If you really want me to help you, where exactly is he?" He led her to a patch of ground. But there was a problem. Look around that kind of land and you understand it immediately. Grass. Open space. No clear marker. No neat street corner. No house number. Nothing that would let her walk away and say, "Yes, I know exactly where to send the police." So she did something almost absurdly simple. She took the empty can in her hand, and she tossed it behind her. That was the marker. That small red and silver object became the point between a missing man and the truth. It became the thing that told police where to look. And later, it almost became the thing that exposed her. Because there was another problem with that can. On that estate, almost nobody drank sugar-free Red Bull. Caroline did. So when word got back that the police had been guided by a can, the man she feared began putting the pieces together. He went through the people around him in his head. Who drank that? Who could have left it? Who had been near that place? And slowly, the answer started pointing back to the woman sleeping beside him. That is the kind of detail this case is built on. Not big theatrical evidence. Not some clean detective movie clue. Just a can in the grass. A woman pretending not to be terrified. A buried body. And a man who still believed, for a while, that the person betraying him could not possibly be the woman he trusted most. But to understand how Caroline ended up there, standing on that land, marking a grave with a drink can, we have to step back to a road where a man vanished between 2 points that should have been easy to connect. A road in the dark. A cyclist in the rain. And 11 kilometers where a human being seemed to disappear from the world. At first, the case looked like a missing person search. Difficult, yes. Urgent, yes. But not necessarily murder. Tony was 63. A retired serviceman. He had survived cancer, and after that kind of experience, he seemed to carry a very specific idea about what the rest of his life should mean. He wanted to give something back. So he took part in endurance fundraising, the kind where a person sets a punishing physical challenge and other people donate money to charity if they complete it. For Tony, the challenge was a long cycling route across Scotland, following the A82. Nearly 100 miles. For a younger person it would have been demanding. For a man in his 60s, cycling through remote roads, changing weather, and long stretches of countryside, it was the sort of thing that made his family worry. His daughter helped him prepare. The gear, the equipment, the little things someone takes because they expect to come home and talk about how hard it was. Nobody standing there could have known they were looking at the beginning of a disappearance. The first piece of the route made sense. Police later used the limited CCTV they could find. This was not a city covered in cameras from every angle. This was rural Scotland. Mountains, roads, open stretches, places where a person could move for miles and leave almost no digital trace. The first confirmed point placed Tony at a train station in the late afternoon. He got off, got on his bicycle, and started moving. Another camera caught him later near a petrol station, still on the route. So far, everything lined up. The final confirmed sighting came at a hotel and bar along the road. It was late. Around 11:30 at night. The weather was awful. Heavy rain. Darkness. The kind of conditions where even driving would make a person tighten their hands around the steering wheel. Tony came in and ordered coffee. The manager remembered him because Tony explained what he was doing. He was cycling for charity. The manager looked at the night outside and tried to persuade him to stay until morning. That detail matters. Not because it changes what happened, but because it leaves the case with one of those painful little hinges. He could have stayed. He did not. Tony finished the coffee, stepped back into the rain, and continued south. The next village on the route should have caught him on camera. That was the expectation. If he had kept going, if nothing had happened, if the ride had simply continued through the night, there should have been another trace. But there was nothing. Tony never appeared. That is where the first real silence opens in the file. He was seen alive at the hotel. The next camera never recorded him. Between those 2 points, roughly 11 kilometers of dark road, Tony and his bicycle were gone. Search teams went in. Police dogs. Helicopters. Mountain rescue. Large areas of wild terrain were searched. The kind of search where people are not just looking beside a road, but across land where weather, darkness, and distance can swallow evidence. Nothing. No body. No bicycle. No clear sign of a crash. No piece of equipment that proved an attack. No simple answer for the family. And that absence shaped the early case. Because investigators can suspect many things, but suspicion does not locate a body. Suspicion does not tell a court where a person died. Suspicion does not prove whether a missing man fell, crashed, got lost, was struck, or met someone on that road. For 3 years, Tony remained a missing man. There was one lead. An anonymous letter pointed police toward 2 twin brothers who were known in the area and had been drinking at the same hotel on the night Tony disappeared. Sandy and Robert. They ran a hunting business. They had been at a hunting dinner, and their route home took them along the same road Tony was cycling. That sounds important. But important is not the same as enough. When police questioned them, the brothers admitted being at the hotel. They admitted traveling along the road. But they denied seeing any cyclist. And without more, that lead could not carry the case. So Tony remained missing. A man leaves a hotel in a rainstorm. He never reaches the next camera. Years pass. His family waits. The road keeps its secret. And then, out of nowhere, a woman called police and said she knew what happened. Not because she saw Tony that night. Because her fiancé had told her. Caroline was not a random caller. That is what makes the beginning of her role so unsettling. She worked in forensic pathology. Her professional life was close to death in a way most people never experience. Bodies, examinations, medical facts, the difficult quiet of a place where questions are answered through evidence rather than emotion. So when she picked up the phone and told police she had information about a murder, the call carried a strange weight. This was not a person casually repeating gossip. This was someone trained to understand what a dead body means inside an investigation. But the reason she knew anything was almost impossible to process. The man who told her was the man she planned to marry. His name was Sandy. He was one of the twin brothers mentioned in that old anonymous tip. He and his brother Robert ran a hunting company on a large estate. On paper, Sandy seemed like the kind of man Caroline had been looking for after leaving a long relationship. Outdoorsy. Independent. Strong. Someone with land, mountains, guns, dogs, rough weather, and that whole life that can seem solid when a person is tired of instability. They met through a dating app. A friend joked before the first meeting that Caroline was driving a long way to meet a stranger. What if he was a killer? It was meant as a joke. That is one of those lines that becomes unbearable only later. The relationship moved fast. Very fast. Sandy showed interest in Caroline's work, maybe too much interest when seen with the knowledge that came later. At the time, she read it as connection. He dealt with animal carcasses through the hunting business. She dealt with human remains through her profession. In a strange way, they seemed able to talk about death without flinching. To someone on the outside, that might sound odd. To Caroline, it felt like being understood. Within weeks, they were engaged. Friends warned her not to rush. She had recently come out of a long relationship. She was vulnerable. Maybe she needed time. But love, especially when it arrives like rescue, has a way of turning warnings into background noise. One night, while they were driving, Caroline asked Sandy a question couples sometimes ask when they are trying to turn romance into a future. If they were going to marry, she said, they needed honesty. Everything. Good, bad, shameful, hidden. No secrets. The air in the car changed. She felt it. At first, she tried guessing ordinary things. Had he been married? Did he have children? Was he in debt? Each guess was wrong. Sandy stopped the car. He asked if she loved him. She said yes. And he told her he had killed a man. He said that 3 years earlier, he and Robert had been drinking at the hotel. They were driving home when a lorry's headlights dazzled him. In that moment, he hit a cyclist. The impact sent the man over the vehicle. According to Sandy, the speed and the force meant the cyclist could not have survived. So he and Robert buried him. Caroline asked where. Sandy said the body was on the estate, near the area where they had practiced shooting together. Imagine what that does to a person's mind. Not just hearing a confession. Hearing that the place where you stood with your fiancé, the place tied to your own memories of the relationship, may have been hiding a man's body beneath it. That night, while Sandy slept, Caroline searched online. She entered the details he had given. A cyclist. Scotland. Missing. The dates. The age. And Tony appeared. This was not a vague story. The missing man was real. His family was real. The search was real. The unanswered grief was real. At first, Caroline did what people sometimes do when truth is too heavy. She tried to soften it. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe Sandy was a good man who had made a terrible mistake. Maybe fear had taken over. Maybe this did not make him a monster. But the file changes right here. Because Sandy did not simply confess and show remorse. He said the estate had changed hands. The new owner had permission to build. Work could begin. And Tony's body was buried near the area that might be disturbed. So Sandy wanted to move it. He wanted to get there first. He wanted Caroline's help. And then he asked a question that would cut through every excuse she had been trying to build around him. How long does it take to burn a body? For a forensic professional, that question was not abstract. It was not panic. It was planning. And now Caroline had to face a possibility that must have felt almost impossible to look at directly. Had Sandy loved her? Or had he seen her profession and realized she could be useful? Was the fast engagement romance, or access? Was she his future wife, or a tool he hoped to use before the ground gave up his secret? We cannot state what was in Sandy's mind from the beginning. The file does not prove that the relationship was designed that way from the first message. But Caroline had every reason to ask the question. Because the man who said he trusted her with his biggest secret was now asking her how to destroy the last physical trace of another human being. That is when she called the police. And when she said it had to happen quickly, she meant it. The body might be moved. The truth might disappear. Tony might vanish all over again. Calling the police should feel like the safe part of a story. Here, it did not. When officers took Caroline's account, they asked a question that exposed the weakness in the whole case. Could she show them exactly where Tony was buried? She could not. Sandy had only said the body was near the shooting area. But a shooting area on an estate is not a neat location. It can mean a wide stretch of land, rough ground, open grass, features that all look similar unless you know exactly what you were looking for. Without a precise location, police had a problem. Caroline had given them a confession. She had named the brothers. She had connected the story to Tony's disappearance. But without the body, they were still in dangerous territory. A person can confess privately and deny it publicly. A caller can sound credible and still be challenged. A missing person can remain legally difficult to turn into a homicide case. So police asked Caroline to keep contact with Sandy. Think about that for a second. A woman had just told police her fiancé may have killed a man and wanted help destroying a body. And the practical answer was, go back, stay close, get more. That is where Caroline's role stops being just the person who reported it and becomes something much darker. She had to act normal. She had to keep the trust of the person she feared. She had to stand beside him, talk to him, ask questions carefully, and try not to show that she had already gone to the police. She went back to the estate. She suggested they go shooting again. That made sense because Sandy had said the burial site was near the place where they practiced. Once they were there, she pushed him. If he really wanted her to help, he needed to show her. He took her to the spot. But the moment she saw it, another problem appeared. There was nothing she could confidently remember. No obvious landmark. No convenient tree. No signpost. No stone wall she could describe clearly. Just land. So she used the can. The empty sugar-free Red Bull. A tiny decision made under enormous pressure. She threw it down like it meant nothing, left the place, and as soon as she could, she sent police the location and told them about the marker. With that, officers moved. The brothers were arrested, and the estate was secured. For a moment, Caroline thought the nightmare might be ending. But the police had moved before the body was found. That matters. At that exact stage, they were still working from Caroline's statement and the marked location. They did not yet have Tony's remains. They did not yet have physical proof that would tie the brothers to the ground beneath that can. Investigators seemed to hope that if the brothers were brought in, one of them might talk. They did not. In interview, Sandy and Robert gave the same kind of answer again and again. No comment. No confession. No collapse. No useful admission. Now the police were stuck. They had arrested 2 men, but they still did not have the body. They could not hold them indefinitely on hope. So the brothers were released. And this is where the case becomes almost unbearable. Because their release did not just weaken the investigation. It put Caroline in danger. She asked police what she was supposed to do. They told her they had not revealed her role. But from Caroline's point of view, that offered almost no comfort. Who else would know? Who else had the connection? Who else had recently been trusted with the secret? Worse, the brothers could not stay on the estate while it was under police control. So Sandy and Robert asked to move into Caroline's apartment. This is the part that feels almost impossible to believe, but it is central to the psychological tension of the case. Caroline had reported them. Caroline had marked the burial site. Caroline knew they were capable of hiding a body. And now she was expected to share a roof with them. Refusing could expose her. Accepting placed her beside the very men she feared. So she let them in. From the outside, that decision looks irrational. But inside the pressure of the moment, it had a terrible logic. If she acted differently, they might know. If they knew, she might be harmed. If she kept playing the role, maybe police would find Tony. Maybe the evidence would arrive before her mask slipped. The emotional trap tightened in another way too. Sandy did not suspect her at first. He suspected Robert. Robert, in turn, suspected Caroline. Sandy defended her. He told his brother not to think that way. Caroline would not do that. He trusted her. That trust became its own kind of torture. Because Caroline was betraying him. She had done the right thing, but emotionally it did not feel clean. He had given her his biggest secret. He believed she was on his side. And the more he defended her, the heavier her double life became. This is one of the reasons the case cannot be told as a simple good versus evil timeline. Caroline's actions helped bring Tony home. But while she was doing that, she was also being psychologically pulled apart. Fear, guilt, love, disgust, loyalty, duty. All of it at once. And the body still had not been found. Sandy was confident. The estate was huge. Police would not find it. But he did not know about the can. At least, not yet. The Red Bull can got police to the area. But the ground did not immediately give them Tony. That is another strange bend in the case. You expect the marker to lead directly to the discovery. In a cleaner story, investigators dig beneath the can and find the answer. That is not what happened. They dug in the area Caroline had marked and found bones. Many bones. But testing showed they were not human. The estate had used parts of the land to dispose of animal remains, which made the search messier. A place full of bones can look like the answer while still hiding the one body everyone is trying to find. So the investigation stalled again. Imagine the pressure on Caroline during this period. She had taken the risk. She had gone back to Sandy. She had marked the land. She had lived with the brothers. And still, there was no Tony. No body meant no release from the lie. No body meant Sandy and Robert could continue hovering around her life. No body meant every hour carried the possibility that someone would work out what she had done. Police brought in a soil expert. This is a quieter kind of evidence, but it is important. The expert looked around the area near the can and noticed something others could have missed. A patch of ground where the vegetation did not sit right. The grass did not match the surrounding growth. It suggested disturbance. Not the dramatic clue people expect. No exposed bones. No torn clothing lying in the open. Just grass that grew wrong because the earth beneath it had been moved. So they dug again. This time, not far beneath the surface, something red appeared in the soil. A piece of clothing. The color matched what Tony had been wearing when he disappeared. After 3 years, Tony was found. That should have been the moment the case finally became solid. For Tony's family, it meant the long terrible uncertainty had changed shape. Not relief, exactly. There are losses where answers do not heal the wound. But the question of where he was could finally be answered. For the investigation, the discovery changed everything. The missing cyclist was no longer only a missing person. The estate was no longer only a place mentioned in a private confession. The ground itself had confirmed Caroline's account. But the discovery also created a new danger. The news spread. Human remains had been found on the estate. Sandy saw it and could not understand how police had located the grave so accurately. The estate covered thousands of acres. Why there? Why that patch? Someone had told them. At first, he thought maybe police had bugged Caroline's apartment. He searched the place for listening devices. He found nothing. Still, even then, he did not fully turn on Caroline. His suspicion remained tangled around Robert. The body's discovery allowed Sandy and Robert to leave Caroline's apartment and return to the estate. The moment they were gone, Caroline took another crucial step. She went to the police with secret recordings. One recording came from a conversation where Sandy had been drinking and talked about what happened. Caroline asked how he could go on with a normal hunting day after what had happened to Tony. Sandy's answer was cold. It was him or me. That sentence mattered. It sounded less like panic after an accident and more like the logic of a man choosing himself over a dying stranger. But even more important was what Caroline had learned from Robert. The story Sandy had told her originally made it sound like Tony had died instantly. A tragic collision, followed by fear, followed by concealment. Terrible, but legally and morally different from what came next. Robert's version changed the center of the case. According to him, when the brothers approached Tony after the collision, Tony was alive. They moved him to the side of the road. They went back to the estate to change vehicles because their car was damaged. When they returned, Tony was still alive, though badly injured. Instead of calling for help, they took him back to the estate. The account described him being left in woodland while they carried on with ordinary obligations before eventually burying him. If true, this was no longer simply about hiding a dead man. It was about leaving a living man without help. That is the moment the moral gravity of the case changes. The collision might have been sudden. The darkness and rain might explain how the vehicle struck him. Alcohol, headlights, speed, fear, all of that can be debated. But if Tony was alive, if there was time to call emergency services, if there were minutes where his fate was not yet sealed, the question becomes much harder. Why did nobody help him? The forensic evidence later gave that question weight. Tony had serious blunt force injuries, but the medical conclusion did not support the idea that he must have died instantly. An expert indicated he could have survived for 20 to 30 minutes without assistance. 20 to 30 minutes. That is not a long time in ordinary life. But in a case like this, it is everything. It is the space between accident and choice. Between panic and cruelty. Between a man being struck and a man being abandoned. Now the police had a body. They had Caroline's account. They had recordings. They had forensic findings. But the case still had a legal problem. Because proving that Sandy and Robert were involved in the collision and burial was one thing. Proving murder was something else entirely. And for that, the investigation needed more than a body in the ground. For a while, the Red Bull can had done exactly what Caroline needed it to do. It pointed police toward the ground. It helped turn a confession into a search area. It became a bridge between a private secret and physical evidence. But evidence has a way of moving in both directions. The detail leaked through local conversation. Police had been guided by an object. A can. A sugar-free Red Bull can. When Sandy heard that, the shape of the betrayal began to appear. He started thinking through the estate. Who drank sugar-free Red Bull? Who had been near that place? Who would have been close enough to leave that exact marker? Caroline. The can that helped find Tony now pointed back to her. Sandy called her. His anger was immediate. He accused her of destroying him and Robert. He reminded her that he had defended her. He had trusted her. And while he was shouting, he was driving toward her apartment. That detail changes the atmosphere completely. This was not only a phone call. This was a man who believed he had been betrayed, heading toward the person he believed had done it. Caroline knew he had keys. She knew he could come inside. She had already spent weeks living with the knowledge of what he might be capable of. So she did the one thing that had become her method of survival. She pressed record. If he hurt her, if he threatened her, if he admitted something, at least there would be a record. Some trace. Some proof that the fear was real. The door opened. And Sandy did not attack her. That might sound like relief. In a simple case, maybe it would be. But for Caroline, it created a deeper emotional split. Sandy came in broken. Crying. Apologizing. Saying she should never have been dragged into it. Saying it was his fault. There are moments in coercive or dangerous relationships where tenderness is almost more disorienting than rage. Rage gives the mind a clear signal. Danger. Get away. Tenderness confuses the signal. It makes the person remember why they loved him. It pulls them back toward the version of him they wanted to believe existed. Caroline's mind was divided. One part saw the man who had frightened her, manipulated her, asked about destroying a body, and helped hide Tony. Another part saw the man who seemed remorseful, vulnerable, sorry, and still emotionally attached to her. That conflict did not end quickly. The investigation stretched on. Nearly 11 months passed between Caroline's first call to police and the eventual resolution of the case. During that time, she was not simply waiting. She was being consumed by the role she had been forced into. There was another layer of damage. Tony's remains were sent for examination at the very place where Caroline worked. Because of her connection to the case, she had to be kept away from the work. Her professional world, the thing that had structured her life, was suddenly taken from her. She was isolated. She could not properly speak about what was happening because of the investigation. Her parents watched her deteriorate. The pandemic restrictions made everything tighter, lonelier, harder to survive. She began using alcohol and illegal drugs to numb herself. And this is where many people looking from the outside ask the obvious question. Why go back? Why return to the estate? Why stay near Sandy again? But trauma does not always move in straight lines. Caroline had been pulled into a bond that mixed love, fear, secrecy, guilt, and dependence. Sandy kept contacting her. Messages of love, longing, apology. The kind of emotional pressure that can make a person who knows the truth still reach for the lie that hurts less. Maybe he was damaged. Maybe his childhood explains something. Maybe he was not truly cruel. Maybe he could change. Maybe the man she loved was still there under the horror. Those thoughts do not make the facts less severe. They show how deeply the facts had trapped her. She returned. And in that final period of closeness, she captured the recording that seemed to strip away the last excuse. They were at the estate, playing a word game. Both had taken drugs. Sandy's guard lowered. He began talking. This time, he spoke about Tony's bicycle. He claimed it had been thrown into water, somewhere near a waterfall on the estate. Hidden. Gone. But the tone mattered too. According to the account, he mocked Tony. He suggested the cyclist should not have been riding there at that hour. There was no meaningful remorse in the way he spoke. Caroline recorded it. That recording helped her see the version of Sandy she had been trying to preserve may not have existed in the way she needed it to. Not a good man who panicked. Not a person she could rescue. Not someone crushed by guilt. A man who could talk about Tony like Tony was the inconvenience. She left again. She gave the recording to police. Officers searched the waterfalls for the bicycle. They did not find it. And that missing bicycle became one of the most haunting pieces of the entire case. Because by then Tony had been found. The brothers were under pressure. The vehicle evidence and burial evidence were building. But the bicycle, the object that had carried Tony into the night, remained somewhere beyond reach. Or perhaps gone forever. And later, Caroline would risk everything trying to find it herself. By this point, the case against the brothers had several layers. The vehicle mattered. The car used that night had damage consistent with a collision involving a cyclist. The brothers claimed it had struck a deer. But the repair history raised questions. They did not go through insurance in the ordinary way. They went to a remote garage and paid cash. The garage owner had photographs from before the repair, and the damage pattern became part of the evidence. The burial site mattered too. In the grave where Tony was found, investigators discovered wood fragments that did not belong there naturally. They traced similar material to the bucket of an excavator on the estate. The spacing of the bucket teeth matched marks left in the ground. The machine could be operated by only a limited number of people, including the brothers. So the basic structure was there. The collision. The concealment. The burial. The attempt to obstruct justice. But murder required a harder question. Was Tony alive after the collision? And if he was, did the brothers know that and choose not to help? Scottish law has a rule requiring corroboration for key facts. One source is not enough. A crucial claim must be supported by independent evidence that points in the same direction. Caroline could testify about what Robert told her. She could provide the recordings. She could explain Sandy's admissions. But the prosecution needed another independent source for the key fact that Tony survived the initial impact. The forensic report became that source. Tony's injuries were serious, but the medical conclusion indicated they were not necessarily instantly fatal. In the absence of assistance, he could have survived for a period of time, estimated around 20 to 30 minutes. That lined up with the account Caroline had heard. The brothers had found Tony alive. They left, changed vehicles, returned, and still did not seek help. Now the two pieces began to reinforce each other. Caroline's evidence said Tony was alive after the crash. The medical evidence said he could have been alive after the crash. That was the line prosecutors needed if they wanted to pursue murder. Police arrested the brothers again. This time, when Sandy sat in interview, the atmosphere was different. Before, he had been able to sit behind no comment. Before, he may have believed the case had no solid spine. But now police had Tony. They had the ground. They had the vehicle. They had the forensic report. And they had Caroline's recordings. At one point, police played the line he had not known existed. It was him or me. That must have been the moment Sandy understood the depth of Caroline's role. She had not only called police. She had not only guided them to the land. She had been recording him. The brothers were charged with murder. From the outside, this might look like the case had reached the top of the mountain. The missing man had been found. The suspects had been identified. The evidence had grown from a private confession into physical and forensic support. A trial could now test the whole story. But the prosecution had a weakness that everyone could see. Caroline. Not because she had done the wrong thing. Without her, the case might never have moved. But the evidence chain for murder depended heavily on a witness who had been pushed to the edge of collapse. A defense lawyer would not ignore that. They would ask why she reported Sandy and then moved back in with him. They would ask about her drug use, her mental state, her relationship, her fear, her contradictions, her emotional attachment to the accused, her failure to separate from him cleanly. Every human wound she had suffered could be turned into a reason for a jury to doubt her. And Caroline knew it. She understood enough about systems, evidence, and pressure to see what was coming. She would have to stand in court and speak against the man she had loved. She would have to relive the whole thing in public. She would have to survive cross-examination while already feeling broken. So before trial, she told prosecutors she did not want to testify. The response was severe. She was told that if she refused, she could be held in contempt of court and jailed. It is hard to miss the cruelty of the position. Caroline had helped uncover the truth. But now the case needed more from her. More memory. More pain. More public exposure. More endurance. And if she could not give it, the same legal system she had helped might punish her. The trial approached. Caroline was supposed to appear. She did not. And the reason she disappeared that day leads back to the one object still missing from the case. Tony's bicycle. On the first day of trial, Caroline did not go to court. She went back to the estate. Her thinking, from the outside, may seem impossible to follow. But inside her fear, it had a desperate kind of sense. The prosecution needed her because so much rested on her testimony. If she could find Tony's bicycle, maybe the case would have another physical object. Something independent. Something that did not depend on whether a jury believed her. Something that could speak without shaking, without being cross-examined, without having its mental health attacked in court. Sandy had said the bicycle was thrown into water near a waterfall. Police had searched and failed to find it. Caroline tried anyway. She set out on foot across a huge distance, roughly 30 kilometers. At some point, exhausted and still determined, she took a tractor to keep going. The act was not rational in the ordinary sense. It was the act of someone who believed a missing object might save her from the witness box and save the case from collapsing. She reached the waterfall area. She entered the water again and again, searching for the bicycle Tony had ridden into the dark years earlier. She did not find it. A search helicopter eventually located her. She was arrested for contempt of court. Sit with that for a moment. A woman whose call had revived a 3-year missing person case, whose marker helped lead police to Tony's body, whose recording strengthened the evidence, whose entire life had been damaged by the pressure of cooperating, was now in custody because she could not face the courtroom. There is no clean way to feel about that. The court needed her. Tony's family needed the truth tested. The legal process needed witnesses. But Caroline was not a machine built to carry evidence without breaking. She was a person who had lived inside the case, not outside it. While she was in custody, expecting she would be forced into court, the case shifted again. The prosecution withdrew the murder charge. The charge was reduced. Sandy pleaded guilty to culpable homicide and attempting to defeat the ends of justice. Robert admitted attempting to defeat the ends of justice. Because of those pleas, Caroline no longer had to testify before a jury. Why would prosecutors step back from murder after building toward it? The answer seems to sit in the risk. If they pushed the murder case, Caroline would be central. The defense would likely attack her credibility aggressively. Her mental state, drug use, relationship with Sandy, return to the estate, disappearance on the trial date, all of it could become ammunition. If the jury doubted her, the murder case might fail. And if the case failed too badly, the brothers might walk away from more serious accountability. So prosecutors accepted the lesser pleas. It was not the ending Tony's family wanted. For them, the reduction meant some questions would never be fully tested in court. What exactly happened on the A82? How long was Tony alive? What did each brother do and know? Which parts of the private accounts were true, and which parts were shaped to reduce blame? Those questions remained partly locked away. Sandy received 12 years in prison. Robert received 5 years and 3 months. In court, Sandy said he had been cowardly and should have come forward. He said Caroline had been right to contact police and that he blamed himself. Maybe those words were sincere. Maybe they were the only words left to say in a courtroom. The case does not let us open his mind and read what was real. What we can see is what happened. Tony disappeared. His body was hidden. His family was left without him for years. Caroline was pulled into the secret and nearly destroyed by it. And the final legal result did not answer every question the case had raised. Caroline was released. The contempt matter did not leave her with a criminal record. She later moved to the coast, stopped using drugs, received psychiatric help, and built a healthier life with a new partner. But the cost of her role remains one of the most disturbing parts of the file. A justice official later said that if Caroline had chosen to say nothing, Tony's case might still be unsolved. That is likely true. Without her call, where would police have looked? Without the can, which patch of ground would have mattered? Without the recordings, how much of the brothers' own words would ever have reached investigators? Still, there is a hard question underneath that praise. What happens to the person who helps the system solve the case, when the system also needs that person to keep bleeding for it? Caroline did the right thing. But the right thing did not protect her from fear, collapse, isolation, or handcuffs. And Tony's bicycle was still gone. At the center of this case, there are 3 objects. The can. The body. The bicycle. The body proved Tony had not simply vanished into the landscape. He had been hidden. Buried on land connected to the men Caroline named. The bicycle, still missing, represents the part of the story that never fully came back. It was the thing Tony rode when he left the hotel. It should have been part of the physical truth. Instead, it became another absence. Another place where the file goes quiet. But the can is different. The can does not belong to Tony. It does not belong to the original night on the road. It arrived years later, because a woman under impossible pressure needed to mark a place without being seen marking it. That is why it stays in the mind. It was not important because of what it was. It was important because of the moment it captured. Caroline standing beside Sandy, pretending to be close to him, while secretly helping police find the man he had buried. A gesture so small it could be missed by anyone watching. A tossed can. A silent message. Dig here. And the cruel thing is, the same object that helped bring Tony home also turned back toward Caroline like a spotlight. Once Sandy learned the detail, he could trace it. Sugar-free Red Bull. Caroline. The person he trusted. The person he defended. The person he never believed would betray him. That is the emotional engine of the case. Not just that Sandy and Robert hid a body. Not just that Tony vanished in 11 kilometers of rain-dark road. Not just that a legal system struggled to prove the difference between a fatal collision and murder. It is that the truth had to pass through a person who was emotionally tied to the suspect. Caroline was not a detached witness. She was not safely watching from outside the story. She loved Sandy. Feared him. Lied to him. Recorded him. Returned to him. Tried to save herself from testifying against him. Tried to find a bicycle in water because she thought a piece of metal might carry what her own voice could not. That is what makes the case linger. The most frightening question is not only what happened to Tony on that road. It is what Sandy would have done if Caroline had said yes when he asked for help. If she had told him how to destroy a body. If she had kept quiet because love, fear, or guilt made silence feel easier. If that can had never landed in the grass. Tony might still be beneath the ground. His family might still be waiting. The estate might have been built over. The road might have kept its secret. And that is the uncomfortable truth this file leaves behind. Sometimes a case does not break open because investigators find a perfect clue. Sometimes it breaks because one frightened person makes a tiny choice at the exact moment the truth is about to disappear. A drink can in the grass. A patch of disturbed soil. A red piece of clothing under the earth. A missing bicycle that never came back. Tony had started that ride for charity. He never reached the finish. But years later, people began writing in his memory, continuing the route he could not complete. That detail does not undo what happened. It does not fill the years his family lost. It does not answer every question from that night on the A82. But it gives the story a final shape that is not only about concealment. Tony was hidden. Then he was found. And the road he never finished did not stay silent forever.